Yeah, hi, welcome. I'm Alistair Leith, and I'm the founder and director of the Online Astronomy Society Academy, and also the founder of Space Cadets. And what we're looking at here is a new course, slightly different direction, looking at coding for beginners. So bear with me while we go through this brief introduction and then get into some of the meat of what we'll be doing. Firstly, what is coding? Well, coding in short is a language humans use to communicate with computers to get it to do things. And there's different areas of that in ICT. Um, One of the biggest questions here is which coding language, should I use? Well, the straightforward answer to that is what do you want to do? As we'll look at later in this presentation, so I'm not going to go into too much now, but there's different areas of development or coding which concerns the internet. It concerns applications, so building things like Word, Excel, PowerPoint. These were Microsoft applications, or building even the browsers and applications. So software that does something. And then you got the relatively newer field of mobile apps and creating mobile apps, which things like mobile phones and tablet computers all use. So these are kind of the various sort of areas that coding gets used. So in terms of looking to get into coding, it really does depend on what you want to do. We here are starting off with a thing called HTML, CSS, and then going into JavaScript, which I'll explain a bit more about that as we go. But yeah, like we write words for people to read and learn and follow instructions, coding or computer code is produced for computers to follow and do things. That's essentially what coding is. And HTML, and CSS, where does that fit in? Well, strangely enough, these aren't coding languages. Oh, so then now, if they're not coding languages, why are we discussing it here? Well, they used to build and structure websites. And believe it or not, for many people going into coding, building and structuring websites is often seen as the way to go in. Look at it that the learning curve for programming can be like that. There is a lot of jargon, there's a lot of technology there, there's a lot of different tools and things that have been developed at a scary rate. And for many, starting with HTML and CSS, while they're not regarded as being coding languages, still use many of the tools that coding languages use, like, for example, a coding editor, Notepad++, for example, or Atom, or as we'll be using VS Studio to build these things. And they use many of the websites as well to get help and to get information on how to compile these. So why aren't they coding languages then? Well, for the simple reason, as they used to structure and build and structure websites using tags and things called classes, which we'll discuss later, they don't contain the regular kind of programming features like variables or loops or functions, things like that, which regular programming languages do contain. But nevertheless, they're a great way to get in because A, as I said, it gets you using a coding editor. It gets you looking at the syntax or the code or the writing, if you like, and it gets you into the habit of typing, gets you into the habit of being analytical and an attention to detail. The reason why those skills are important here is because if you make one mistake in any of these areas, chances are what you're producing will not work. And that can be just a comma out of place, a set of speech marks out of place, a semicolon out of place, or missing. Any one of these can result in the whole thing going wrong. And while at the end of the day you can't break anything, I mean, not easily. It does give you a safe environment in which to play, to have a look, and it hopefully after this you'll also enhance your research skills moving forward. But that's HTML and CSS and why they're not coding languages. So what is the best coding language to learn? I think went over this briefly earlier, but it very much depends on what you want to do. There's hundreds of different coding languages, let's be honest. You've got C++, you've got C#, you've got .NET. Please don't run away at this point. Please don't run away. We're not going there. I'm just glossing over it. But if you look at the different types of programming languages, there are literally hundreds. And you think, well, where do I start? It's like trying to climb a big mountain and you've got various different pathways. Well, which is the easiest one to go up? But where should I go? But where should I start climbing first? Which is going to be the most useful to me? The answer to that, as I said before, is it depends on what you want to do. Whether you're going to go into web developments, you might be looking at, as I said, HTML, CSS, then going into JavaScript, and then going into PHP, and then going into maybe Python. Those are involved there in web development. And then you've got application development, which is where you're looking at, say, C# or C++. These are more the kind of application-based languages. Mobile devices, where you might want to start looking at Swift, which is used for development there. They all have their own specialized coding languages, and some of them are harder than others. So while they'll say, for example, yes, you need to go into .NET, or you need to go into C# or C++, C++ is actually one of the hardest languages to learn because it actually interfaces very close to the way computers communicate. So languages provide a bit of a barrier between how computers talk and how we talk. That's a lot of how and why programming languages are used because it provides that kind of Klingon, if you like. Don't know why I use that as an example, but it allows that language between one and the other to interface. And some are easier than others. Now, the easier ones they say are going into JavaScript and going into maybe Python are the easier languages to get into. But there's no real point in learning JavaScript until you have done HTML and done CSS. So while these two aren't exactly programming languages, they are still very useful out there in industry. And part of being a developer is understanding and knowing HTML, knowing CSS, cascading styling sheets, and knowing JavaScript, with PHP being a good plus on top of that. PHP we don't look at until quite a fair bit later. Why is PHP interesting or useful? Well, very briefly, they say it's an antiquated language. If you ask many web developers about PHP, they say it's antiquated, it's useless, it's out of date. No, it is not. Firstly, with PHP, it is regularly updated. And secondly, B with PHP is it's used in a lot of different websites. WordPress being a popular one, and there's a learning portal called Moodle, which universities use, and PHP is built on that. I know I'm speaking to both children and parents here, and I realise I'm probably going, Alistair, you've lost me already. I know I have. All these acronyms, PHP and Python, they're all programming languages which do take time to learn. And what I'm trying to provide here is the base camp for climbing up that steep mountain. What I'm trying to provide here is a not so steep learning curve where we can begin learning the skills, begin playing with the applications, and begin developing the skills we are going to need to meet some of these. Another thing I'll give you at this early stage as well is a lot of the skills that you need and use at the beginning are transferable. That is to say, the skills you learn, you pick up learning HTML and CSS and JavaScript can be used and come in handy for learning some of the other languages. And when you learn an actual programming language, you understand the technical terms there, what they mean, how they work. That doesn't change much from one language to the next, to the next, to the next. That's why some people have badges of honor of all the programming language they know, which looks like that. It makes them look like they're rocket scientists. And don't get me wrong, they are very clever people to manage all that. But it does mean that once you learn one, a lot of that helps you go on to the next stage and the next stage and the next stage. And that is the ethos and theory I am coming in with this from. So if I'm scaring you, please bear with me. It does get easier. Don't run away. Our plan then will be learning the following. HTML or hypertext markup language, and then CSS, which is cascading styling sheets, and then JavaScript. So HTML is basically, if you're building a house, HTML is all about putting in the doors, the windows, the floor, the light fittings. It's all about that. Putting in the stairs, putting on the door handles. That's what HTML is all about. It's just building the house. And once you've got it, the light switches won't work. There won't be anything in there. It'd be a bit like this house once was, but when we moved in, there were no carpets, no pictures, nothing like that. So it was a basic shell. Yes, that's what HTML will give you, the basic shell. Functional, but not very pretty. In come the decorators, in come the people who can make it look pretty. This is where cascading styling sheets come in. Cascading styling sheets will provide fancy colouring, fancy backgrounds, fancy fonts. They will CSS will provide the fancy buttons, things like that. But CSS by itself will not be enough to make things work per se. Where you might have the wires put in by HTML, where you might have the plumbing put in for the water by HTML, where you might have the you get the general idea, put in by HTML. It takes then JavaScript to make the electric work when you flick the switch. So when you flick the switch and the light comes on, that's what JavaScript does. When you turn the tap and water comes out, it's the water coming out is what JavaScript does. So that's essentially what JavaScript does. It puts the plumbing in and makes things work when you flick switches. We're going there last in this because HTML and CSS really need to be mastered first before we can go into JavaScript. JavaScript is pretty much what will make a website sing and dance after CSS has made it look pretty, if that makes sense. Yeah, so the setup, and we will get there in a couple of physical videos. I'm not just going to explain this in the presentation, but there are a few things first we need to set up. A browser. So a browser, a bit like browsing a book, the browser is a piece of software that enables us to look at the website. The website is just full of web pages. That is all the front end of the internet is. Web page from web page from web page. So we need a piece of software called a browser that enables us to look at those. You've probably met them yourself already. Here's a few of them. Microsoft Explorer. It's still out there, but Microsoft don't support it anymore. It's been made redundant to be tied off by Microsoft because they wanted to bring out something a bit more up to date. In walks Microsoft Edge, which is usually part of your application in Windows, maybe 10 or 11 when you start up. Mozilla Firefox is another free one, and Google Chrome, which I've asterisked here because that is the main one we are using. Google Chrome will be what we'll be using here. So if you don't have Google Chrome, I strongly suggest that you download and install that. It is free, and links will be provided where you can do that. A text editor is also going to be needed. Something where you can open the text up, like you use Microsoft Word to edit English or a language. You need an editor like Microsoft Word to be able to edit code. Here's an example of a couple of them here. Windows Notepad is the crudest form of editor that will open up any code and allow you to have a play. Notepad++ is another one, and that is a very good coding editor, to be fair. I have used it. Atom is another one that's been used, but I'm coming in with VS Code. And I'm coming in with VS Code because that's an industrial standard. And despite that sounding scary, it isn't actually that bad to use. So I'm using VS Code. And trust me, if I can get away with using that, so can you. And I've been playing around with various websites and building various things using that. And I wouldn't be bringing it in if I didn't think that my guys could handle it as well. So bear with me. I might be encouraging you to climb up some very tricky looking rock faces, but I will not let you fall. Trust me. Okay, my hand is there. You have guide ropes on you. You will not fall, and you will understand what we're doing. Slowly, surely is how we begin as we gradually go up this mountain that we're climbing together. But as with any mountain, you don't just climb straight up like that. You have to start slowly. Even with Mount Everest, there's lower base camps that you have to negotiate too. And yes, I don't like to sort of compare this course to climbing what is the tallest peak in the world. But as far as programming goes as a whole, it will certainly seem like it. And you guys have taken a first step by coming to the basic base camp where we're talking about it as we start this climb together. So, yeah, got VS. I know you haven't at this stage. That's more of a prompt for me, but for you, that means I'm going to provide the links and the videos now for how to download VS Code and Google Chrome and to install it. So we'll see you there for this exciting journey and continue once we've done that. Look forward to seeing you soon.